This is Choose the Bear, where we dive deep into the power and joy of living a vibrant, independent life on your own terms. This podcast is your go-to source for smart, fun, and insightful conversations about what it means to embrace independence and live the life you choose. I'm Kat Calvin, and together we'll explore how this movement is challenging outdated stereotypes, redefining success, and empowering people to live their best independent lives. Hello, everyone. Today's episode is super fun, and I specifically put it out this week because I want to give you plenty of time to add this author's new book to your Christmas wish list or your gift list or your gifting for yourself list. Meghan Keane, you may know her because she is the creator of the absolutely fantastic NPR podcast Life Kit, which I love so much. It's one of those podcasts that think of an issue, if you're thinking about finances or health things or like whatever, you can scroll down the Life Kit playlist and find an episode that will answer your questions. And it's done in this very just approachable and lovely way. And Meghan is the person who created it. So I was so excited already to talk to her. And then I got her book, Party of One. It's brand new. It's so beautiful. It's basically like NPR Life Kit for singles. It's not just a book, that's sort of like stories about women being single or whatever, which is great on its own. But what this is she investigates so many of the different issues and challenges and things to think about, everything from, psychology and how to overcome, overthinking and loneliness and like activities. And there's just so much in this book. The illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. It is such a good book. It is a book I will be buying for every woman I know who is single or recently divorced or who I think should get divorced or whatever else. It's a really, really, really beautiful book. And I was so excited to talk to Meghan, who I would like to be my new best friend because she's so fun. This is a really, really great conversation. And I hope you enjoy it. And I hope that you put this book on your Christmas shopping list. So enjoy. All right, everyone. As I said in the intro, I'm so excited to be talking to the author of this book. I was just a few days before I read this, I was talking to a friend and I was like, man, I'm so surprised because I started this podcast and there's so many books about being child-free, which is great, but there are really not that many books about like single life. And then I read this book and I was like, well, this is the only book we need on the subject. Stop all the other publishing. This is the book. So I am here with Meghan Keane, who you may know. We're going to talk a little bit about her excellent show, Life Kit on NPR, which I also just absolutely love. But she has a book. First of all, it's an incredible title. Party of One, which is so good. Be your own best life partner. First of all, it's gorgeous. Like the illustrations are ridiculous. A friend of mine, Omkari Williams, who has been on the show. She has a book called Microactivism, and it also has these beautiful illustrations. And I sent her a text and I said, you have to look at this book. It's the only book I know that is like as beautiful as yours. Like it's so, so pretty, but also, and this is not surprising because you're from NPR, it's so smart. I mean, you interview really incredible people. You go really in depth about subjects that make so much sense when you're talking about this, but that most people just absolutely would not put in a book about being single, would not think about, which we will go into. I am like deeply obsessed with this book. It's probably my Christmas present to all of my single friends. So Meghan, oh my God, I know I'm just like raving, but that is how much I love this book. Thank you for being on this show.
Oh my God, Kat, that was an incredible intro. I'm deeply flattered. It is a gorgeous illustrations. They're all hand painted by my illustrator L.A. Johnson, who also works at NPR. And then they're like highly like scanned with like high resolution, and they
Yeah.
just look. It's not just like I think a nice book to read, in my personal opinion, but like a beautiful book to look at, which was a total like bonus for me.
I mean, it really is. And it's, first of all, I was like, man, I wish I had been interviewed in this book so I could have a watercolor of myself. And, but also, like, you chose such creative places to illustrate your points in different
hmm
ways. You'll see when you read the book, there's this whole sort of theme about the haze, and it comes
Yes.
back in different places. It's just so smart. Before we start though, tell everybody about yourself, who you are, what you do, whatever you want to say to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Meghan Keane. I am a journalist. I've been at NPR basically my whole career. I kind of came in during the early days of podcasts and kind of rode those coattails. I helped start TED Radio Hour, Invisibilia, a wonderful long form podcast about human behavior. And then about 6 years ago, I was asked to start NPR's service journalism brand, which and it came Life Kit. And it's service journalism is just a fancy way of saying how to, like consumer news, like news you can use. So we cover health, wellness, parenting, money, relationships, everything in between. And I'm really, really proud of it. It's kind of blossomed to something I think I like to think is part of the crown jewel of NPR. I'm deeply biased. But yes, my bread and butter is journalism and radio and podcasts. That has been my main thing. So a book was kind of a new territory for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't know that you did Invisibilia, which I also loved. It was
Yes, I was a producer there for
That's
about
awesome.
2-ish years. Yeah,
Yeah.
I learned, you know, it's interesting. It is when you listen to Life Kit versus Invisibilia, Invisibilia is like long, you know, very like long format, very character driven, very like emotional.
Mhm.
And Life Kit is very, here's the facts, here's the research, here's how you can do something. They're very different as a listen, but they really helped, Invisibilia really helped me start Life Kit in terms of like thinking about how to interview people and like how to get the best out of people and like how to deliver information and make things compelling. And so it was a big lesson that I learned early on that, you know, everything helps everything. You know, you can kind of
Yeah.
translate learning into different places. And honestly, too, the Life Kit experience helped me write the book because I was like, well, I don't know how to write a book, but I know how to write 6 Life Kit episodes, and I can pretend that each chapter is a Life Kit episode. And how do I approach those? And so that kind of tricked me into writing rather than being like, oh my God, I don't know if you felt this way. Like, I have to write a whole book. Like, that's very daunting, but like,
Yeah.
kind of breaking it down is like so much more helpful.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because I definitely saw the life kitness in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I really appreciated is that you dig into so many different areas of research and thought that really do impact a single person's life, but that you wouldn't really
Mm-hmm.
think of. So, for instance, when you talk about overthinking versus rumination and go into that, and I'm going to ask you about that, right? And when you talk about amatonormativity, which is a word that I practice so many times.
To me, you
Like,
know what? I didn't get it right until I recorded the book. It's
oh, it's a motto.
normativity. Kind of
See,
like
and I was like,
so
is
it's
it
like I
motto
think
or motto?
tomato, yeah, I think tomato, tomato, and then that's the hook for me. I'm like, oh, it's like tomato.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm glad you told me. But like there's so many things, and of course, like going into friendship and all the things we'll talk about. But it was very each chapter, and you do a really good job of interviewing really great people, but it like incorporating what they're having to say in a sort of storytelling way. And it really did feel like you had done a podcast series about singleness, and each episode is a different chapter in which you like, this time we're going to talk about this. So,
Mhm.
it I think that is part of what makes reading it so compelling, is because
Mm.
it really comes across in a very different way than a book that uh, is sort of like, I'm just going to be a nonfiction book about being single. This is very much like, I'm telling you a story. And I think it's very much from your podcast and radio experience. So it worked really well.
Oh God, I'm glad to hear it. I mean, yeah, I don't know any other type of writing in a lot of ways. So I was like, okay, let's translate this into a different way. And I mean, I feel really lucky that Life Kit, I've learned how to be really responsible about the type of advice we give. And, I take that job really seriously. And so storytelling is part of that, right? And so I want to make sure that people absorb this like really interesting information that can be helpful and free to put into practice in your life. A lot of this is just, knowing facts, changing mindsets, exercises that don't really cost you anything. And put it to action. And I'm glad you say that, like, it felt like that the book felt like it includes things that a lot of people don't really talk about with single life, because when I was reading a lot of books. I've read a lot of books about singleness, and a lot of them are really, there are a lot of great ones out there, and there's a lot of not so great ones. But I was seeing like a trend of just be single, just be happy about it, right? And it's like I was like in this middle of this continuum of people who really wanted to be partnered, um, and weren't, versus people who were single and always wanted to be single. And I was like, I kind of fall like in the middle here.
Mhm.
Like I was like, I can't just be told if you're single, just be happy about it. Because I was like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, how do I actually like unpack that? And so that's why I wanted to dive into things about rumination, managing your emotions, building community. Because for me, it just feels so big and amorphous to be like, it's okay to be single, just be happy. And I think you need to hear that over and over again, right? But then I was like, okay, now I need like specific instructions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that the book was really me kind of helping myself to break down the steps.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's one of the things, and one of the things that I was sort of, when I was taking pictures of the cover and sending it to every single person I know and being like, you have to read this book, uh, that was one thing that was good. And I think, again, because you pulled in so many subjects, is that there's something in here for everyone who is single, regardless of where they're coming at it. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I loved your section about being single at heart, and we'll talk about that. And that's just totally me. Like, I just think it's wild that any woman would ever get married. Like, I don't understand it. Why would you live with a man? It's so weird. So like, so for me, I like, there was a lot of the things about like, the sort of emotional decision making or whatever that I saw in my friends or in people who I talk to about being single. And I was like, this will really, I think, help answer some of your questions or concerns or whatever. And then for those of us who just are love being single and would never want to be anything else, there were also a lot of things in there that were either affirming or that still sort of answered questions. You have a whole thing about financial literacy, which is a
Mhm.
thing that, and future planning, right? Things that, regardless of how you feel about being single, you really have to think about. So it's something where I was like, oh, this is great for me. Oh, this is great for my friend. And oh, this would be because I think that people don't really think about the complexity. And,
Hmm.
and you're totally right. With other books about being single, it's just like, this isn't really addressing is from a real world. And I think generational too. I think it helps that you're younger because we
Hmm.
just have very different concerns
Yeah.
about being single in this particular world and economy than others. And so you brought that in. So I want to start talking about uh, this section that you have that I brought up about overthinking versus rumination, because
Hmm.
for
Sure.
me, I read that and I was like, this actually is, first of all, everybody overthinks.
Yes, this is a widespread normal
Yes.
thing.
But one of the things that is, when I talk to friends and when I've been talking to people doing this podcast, when it comes to being single or when it comes to being child free or whatever, that it's one of the things that I constantly see is like, oh, people are thinking about this constantly and it's taking up so much of their time and so much of their lives that it actually is a bigger deal than it
Hmm.
actually has to be, right? and
Yes.
and whereas, and for those of us who are single at heart, it's like I just never really think about it except when I see a woman with a man and I'm like, thank God I'm single, right? And so like I see constantly how the overthinking is often the thing that's the problem more than anything else, more than the external influences or the culture or whatever. And I love that you talked about that, rumination, et cetera. So can you talk a little bit
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah, totally. So rumination is a very particular flavor of overthinking. And so overthinking is something like you said, we all do, right? Like you think about, okay, I need to plan about how to get home for the holidays. Okay. And then, well, is this plane actually going to be right? And you're just like, you're thinking through a problem, right? And you might think maybe a little longer than you want to, but there's an endpoint, right? You will come up with that plan about how to get home for the holidays, and then you can move on with your day. Rumination is adding self blame and usually a larger why question that's very existential that doesn't really have a concrete answer. And that is particularly draining for our senses and how our brains work, because our brains like having a complete sentence, right? We like knowing answers. And so the problem with rumination becomes that if you're thinking, well, why am I single? Why isn't this happening for me? Your brain then starts to be like, oh, I have some ideas. I'm going to go into like my files and pull out a bunch of crazy ideas that probably don't apply. And because there isn't a good concrete answer to any of those questions, it will keep you'll keep spinning, right? And so that's what the rumination is the spinning. And I thought it was interesting to learn from one of the experts I talked to in the book about rumination. He wrote a whole manual about how to think about rumination for therapists to treat clients. And he was saying to me, look, like when your car breaks down, you might just think, God, this is so annoying or so frustrating. Ruminating would be like, God, why is this happening to me that my car broke down? I'm such a horrible person, right? Like you see how it escalates and becomes something bigger. And you're right, it does exhaust our senses and our bodies and our time, right? And so what I found really interesting was one of the biggest tricks I learned was turn those why questions, why am I single? Why is this happening to me? Why can't I find anyone? Into what questions? Because that kind of flips it on the head and starts focusing you on something about how to take care of yourself right there in the moment. So what can I do right now to feel better? What's something I can do tonight to relax myself? What friend can I call to just check and see how they're doing? Get out of my own head, right? Sometimes, honestly, the answer is like, get out of your own like
Yes.
brain, right? And just like not focus so much on yourself and focus on others, right? That is, wondrous. Remembering there's a big wide world out there. That's really helpful. And I thought that was super interesting because it's this counterintuitive thought, I think, for especially women who are overachievers and highly intellectual, that we can think ourselves out of anything, right? We can use our intellect to solve ourselves out of any problem, and we pride ourselves in it. I know I do. But the problem is that it's actually making us spin our wheels more when it comes to these larger questions. Maybe you do, and like, look, I'm not also trying to say don't go to therapy or don't like examine like trauma or history and understanding the roots of causes that guide your behavior. I'm just saying, if you're thinking about this day in, day out, you're exhausting yourself, right? And so learning how to take breaks is super important. So that maybe when you go to therapy, or if that's what you want to do, figuring out some of these root causes, you have energy for that, right? So for me, I was like, oh, you mean I can't think myself out of this? That was like 35 years in the making of
Right.
realizing that. And so the idea of taking yourself off of a mental off ramp to be like, okay, I am going to actually do something that is nourishing rather than depleting, is going to just ultimately make yourself feel better and more comforted than trying to get to the bottom of allegedly why you're single. Because why are you single? Because maybe you want to be, because maybe and you're just having a bad day, or maybe because you have really high standards, and that's a good thing, right?
Right.
There's a lot of good reasons why you might be single, right? And so rumination is just like this, it's this tricky beast that makes us think that we're problem solving,
Mhm.
but we're really just spinning our wheels. And the
Yeah.
answer is not to oversolve, it's to actually take a step off that beaten path of rewinding the same tapes over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and that's why another very smart thing that you have in your book is the activities and the practices,
Hmm.
which I love. At the end of every chapter, and particularly when I, reading this chapter, and I was just thinking, oh, we've all been here, and like, I know my list of like things I do when I'm overthinking, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna stop
Mm-hmm.
and take a walk, or I'm gonna like go work on a craft project, or yeah, I'm gonna
I
touch,
love it.
get up and do something else. Which is, it's a tough thing to learn. You're right, especially if you're a real thinker. But the fact that you included those activities and practices made it uh, more practical and I think more useful. And especially because, the great thing about being single is you spend a lot of time alone, but also spending a lot of time alone means you can really be in your head.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
having a book that's like at the end of every chapter, okay, here's a thing you could actually do.
Hmm.
it's it's fantastic generally, but particularly for single people, it was a really smart move.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you do have like a lot of space and time to think, which is a blessing and a curse, right? And the answer doesn't have to be you have to think about any of this stuff all the time, right? Like you said, like this menu that you created for yourself of, self-care. I know is kind of a loaded term, but things that just keep you in flow, right? I feel like those are the things that are really helpful for combating rumination is like what's something that's going to not just make you feel good, but put you in a state of flow. I took up sewing this year. And let me tell you, that makes you, well, anything with working with your hands is incredible for flow, right? But it makes you think really hard. If anyone who's constructed a garment from scratch, you have to look at a pattern so carefully, like you're on the Great British Bake Off and it's the technical challenge. You're like, there's like very few instructions here. So it's very absorbing. And like that for me is always a good thing to get me out of my head and just like quiet everything down.
Yeah. No, I definitely find crafts are so great. Like put on a craft, put a TV show in the background. It's funny because my
Hmm.
mom and aunts also, and my mother just the other day was like, "Don't you want me to teach you how to sew?" And I was like, "No, that's too much." And everyone I
It's a
know
lot.
who sews has sewed over their finger, which she has done
Oh,
twice.
oh
And
my
I'm like,
God. I
I,
have not done that yet. Thank God. Knock on wood.
I'm sorry, I like my fingers. But it's true. Like when I sit down and crochet, and then you can think like, oh, I want to, learn a new pattern and learn a new way to do a stitch or something. And it does, it totally absorbs you. Or finding like, I love archery because it's active
Oh, cool.
and you have
That's
to
so
think
neat.
about so many different things when you're shooting that you really can't think about anything else. And yeah, finding those
Mhm.
things that put you in a state of flow, really, whether you're single or not, they're so helpful for finding that peace. But particularly, the beauty of being single is you have so much time. So you can just
Exactly.
sew all your garments.
You could. I have a friend who's doing that we took the same sewing class in DC where we live and she's made so many like awesome pants and jackets and like it's just like been so cool to see. She didn't know how to like, you know, even like get a bobbin together on a sewing machine. Now she's making jackets. It's so
That's
impressive to
amazing.
see.
That's awesome. All right, so let's talk about this word that I got wrong, tomato, tomato. But look, much like
Look, I got it wrong too.
I think you can say it either way.
Yeah.
Mononormativity, because not only is it just it's a great big wonderful new word, but also I feel like it was a really wonderful section of the book. So can you talk us through
Hmm.
what that is?
Sure. Normativity is a term that was coined by a philosopher, Elizabeth Brake. She's at Rice University. And it's essentially this idea that the type of relationship that is put on a pedestal, deemed the best kind of love that everyone should aspire to, is a heterosexual monogamous relationship, often marriage, right? And that as a result, Elizabeth Brake argues, all other types of friendships and relationships suffer and are diminished or even erased into obscurity, right? And it happens at kind of every level, right? Where you see it in our tax code, right? About favoring married couples. You see it in house.
That information you had about the tax code and how actually it was designed to stop women from working blew
Oh,
my mind.
yeah.
It blew my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak and it was pretty blatant too. It's not
Yeah,
like it wasn't kind of snuck in there, right? It was, the guy who, Stanley Surrey, who basically created and was pushing that, was like blatantly saying, like, this is to keep women at home.
absolutely.
Um, and so, um, yes. So, mononormativity is this idea that, at every level, we have a favor towards couples. And so again, like at the tax code level, you see it in housing, you see it in healthcare, but then you also see it in, not, just who we choose to spend time with, who we love. Like, people are not, not seen as deemed, great loves if they're platonic friends, right? Or if they are in a group house, right, that are have considered themselves family, right? You see it just socially, right? About when someone asks you, this is a great example that I got from Elizabeth Brake's book. When someone asks, like, do you have a family? We know what they really mean. They mean, do you
Yes.
have kids?
Yeah.
They don't mean like, well, and it's like kind of a stupid question when you think about it, because it's like, yeah, I got a mom, I have an aunt, we
And you
all
have an
technically
egg.
have a family, but
Right.
what they mean is, do you have kids, right? Which I find fascinating. So it's this perceived structure that once you know it and name it, you do see it everywhere. And it kind of is twin flames with this other thing I go and get into in the book called singleism, which is the this idea from researcher Bella DePaulo. She's coined this term. The idea that there's also a kind of like a tax, right? A discrimination, a marginalization that happens for single people for those same reasons, those big structural reasons I mentioned. But then you see it like going out to a cabin or something for a group vacation with friends, and the single person is expected to pay the same amount for a pull-out couch versus the couple that has the queen size bed and a private bathroom, right? You just see it in all these like smaller ways. And what I found really fascinating about all of this was like, we don't have to do this, right? Like this hurts married people and coupled people too, in a way, because I think that when you demonize singleness and all other types of relationships and love, there's I think a scarcity mindset, which is why I think a lot of people get really upset about being single, that they think that they have to be in a relationship because it's somehow you're part of this rarefied class or whatever. And then also when you demonize singleness as a result, people get scared to then leave
Yes.
situations that are not working for them.
Yes.
And, you know, I think that is ultimately really depressing. And I
And
think I
dangerous.
think
I mean, I
and
know women
dangerous.
who have not left dangerous relationships
Exactly.
because the idea of being alone was so horrifying, or have put themselves into dangerous situations to attempt to couple with someone
Yeah.
because the idea of being alone was so scary or demonized or whatever. And they're like, women have actually died because of this.
Yes. And, there's obviously, too, like so many complicated reasons why some people don't leave those situations, but like it does show you that the social conditioning is that strong, right? Um, and it just seems to me that if once you're aware of this, like it just feels like a kinder way to treat yourself, to
Yeah.
treat other people, to treat your friends. Uh, when you see like it doesn't have to be that this type of relationship or romantic heterosexual marriage is the only way to be, right? My hopes and desires is that a lot of married people read this book, right?
Yeah.
Because I think understanding your own personhood within a marriage or a long-term partnership is like so important. And what that usually then looks like is that you are supporting people who are single in your life, right? And bringing them in and making them part of a larger community. It just feels like it's more of a two-way street between, instead of having all these like kind of camps of like, we have the single people here and we have the couple
Yeah.
people over here. And it just feels like it helps break down and helps everybody. And yet it is still so ingrained in how we think about what is the quote bestest type of love, right? When you think about, I don't know, relationships with best friends, right? Those can be a very sacred and special type of intimacy that's not replicated other places. Um, and we also know from data that one of the biggest keys to a happy, healthy life is not a romantic relationship only. It is all types of relationships. The mentors, the coaches, the coworker who's, your work wife or whatever. I don't like that phrase. But, just like your close friend, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Your close buddy at work. Like all those types of relationships, including romantic ones as well, they all add up and they all roll up into a happier, healthy life, we know from data, not just romantic relationships
Yeah.
alone.
Well, and speaking of data, I think one of the things that I find so interesting, and you talk in the book, and it's great, about the history of marriage and marriage myths, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And we know statistically that in the States particularly, but I imagine it's replicated in other, at least Western countries, that the least happiest people are married women. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's, since we've been taking statistics, married women are the least happy people, and we know that, and yet we still have this myth. And I was reading something the other day that was saying that one of the big reasons that we have this disconnect between men and women in marriage is that men are raised to believe that marriage is the end of their lives and women are raised to believe that it's the beginning of theirs.
Oh, yeah, that's
But
really
then
true.
statistically, married men are the happiest and married women are the least happy, right? So we
Hmm.
know just looking at the data that the myths that we're being told about, why you should be married and why you should be coupled, etc., are false. And yet that still is so pervasive, and it's so strange that, and I think every woman knows, like, most of her married friends are like, why are you married to him? Like, you're so much better than this guy. You're so unhappy, right? And so we know, but it's still this overwhelming uh belief and pressure. And I think part of what I think your book helps with is that you break down so many reasons for why people feel that way. So, I love going places alone. I mean, I love being alone. I've never had a problem with eating out alone or whatever, but I know a
Yeah.
ton of people who do, and who that
Yes.
really freaks out. And so if you are a person who the idea of doing anything alone really scares you, then yeah, you really want to be in a couple so you can have someone
Hmm.
to eat with, right, or to go to the movies with or whatever. And the fact that you break these things down, you talk about even just having hobbies, like little things that actually make your everyday life better, and then have the, like, here, practice this. I think that helps, because I know so many women, and I've had friends say, like, how are you happy being single? Why are you not on the apps or whatever? And I'm like, I don't understand the
Have you
question.
seen the apps?
Right, exactly. Also,
Those are usually people who have not been on the apps too.
my favorite thing is when my friends send me screenshots of the apps as they're going through them, and I'm like, see, this is why I'm not on these things. But, like, it's such a sort of overwhelming obsession.
Yes.
For you, breaking it down, I think, is really helpful. But I do want to talk more too then about friendship, which is
Sure.
a topic I'm really obsessed about. I'm glad that more people are talking about friendship and writing about it and studying it, because as we reach this point where the vast majority soon, because we're at the point where the majority of young people are choosing not to marry or have children, uh,
Hmm.
and we have to rearrange society, tax codes, everything eventually to meet that. But we also have to really start thinking more about centering friendship and community.
Yeah.
Community is a thing that we have lost at the same time that people need it most. And you write about this, and the number of books I've added to my shopping cart because of the people you interviewed in this book is ridiculous. Can you talk a little bit about what you talked about and found when it comes to friendship and community and how important that is?
Yeah, totally. So, like I was mentioning, there's all this research that shows all these different types of connections lead to a happy, healthy life. And the one I'm thinking of specifically is the Harvard Adult Development Study that was done over like decades, with over 700 men. And again, like the findings, the top line finding was it wasn't just marriage in particular that keeps you happy and healthy. It is all types of relationships. And I was like, okay, if this is the one of the longest studies on human life, and this is one of the top lines, why aren't we all taking this so seriously? And I write about this in the book that friendship is not a bonus, it is essential, right? It is protective to our psyches and our health. And it also is just fun, right? Like when you have a good friendship, it is fun. And who doesn't want fun? And so I know a lot of people get frustrated because they're like, well, I don't know how to make new friends. I'm very isolated. And I get that. It's very hard. But what I found was that this idea of being the starter is very powerful. That comes from friendship researcher Marissa Franco, who wrote this wonderful book, Platonic. This idea that like we have all these ideas about what a romantic overture is, right? When we're dating someone or when we start, being more in a relationship with them, but often they're not even sexy. It's like picking people up from the airport, right? Like that. Why is that relegated to a marriage, right? Or a romantic relationship? And instead, we should think about would I do this for a romantic partner and do this for our friends, like making those romantic overtures. And then in terms of like making new friends, being the person who is just extending the invitation. Most people are just waiting for you to extend
Yes.
invitations. And they're almost always like I've never invited someone to something, even if they didn't want to go or had other plans or whatever. They've never been like, why did you ask me this? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I've never had someone be angry at me for inviting them
Yeah.
somewhere. People always feel included. And basically, as soon as you include people in invites, people feel a part of something bigger,
Yeah.
right? And they're more likely to reciprocate. So I know then the next question is always, well, I'm so busy, they're so busy. How do we find time for coffee, like scheduling dates and like, friend dates or whatever. And I get it. I would say make frequent overtures and
Yeah.
invites. Be like, I'm going out with a bunch of friends to do this. You mentioned you want to see this movie. I would love to see it. I'm also a big fan of like the spontaneous invite because I think that's gone out of fashion
Yes.
really in the last few like years, especially as you get older in your adulthood. We used to always do this in college, right? You would swing by someone's dorm room, you'd be like, we're going to like, I don't know, play frisbee. Do you want to come?
Yeah.
um I was not playing frisbee, but those quick, those quick off the cuff, like, oh yeah, I could do it. And
Mm.
again, like my mom, for example, my mom is a huge errands person with friends. They like, she'll go to friend goes,
Oh.
she'll do errands with friends, and like, um, it's just like an easy way to spend time together, right? And so you can build up that friendship. And I think it also kind of like lowers the stakes of like, and now we're at like a dinner together,
Yes. We're being
talking
stare at each
across the
other and
table.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it lowers the stakes, and I think it also empowers the other person to then reach out to you and think,
Yeah.
hey, I want to invite you to something. And then I also the last few friends I've made in the past few years, they're really good about doing the follow-up text after we hang out, being like, it was so great to see you. Um, Loved hearing about this, I can't wait to see you again or something. And like those are really powerful. Um, Ritual is also something that I think is really meaningful. We all need some kind of rituals in our lives, and the beauty is you get to make them up. And those deepen experiences with community, right? Like thinking as, we're recording this for the day before Thanksgiving. Of course, like everyone has their own family traditions, or the tradition is like we don't do Thanksgiving, right? And it's like those exist for a reason because we need to find periods to gather, mark occasions as humans. And so I love the idea of making up new rituals with friends and
I love
bringing
that.
them into
Yeah.
things or deepening rituals. Like um, I write about how uh, this idea from Charles Vogel, who's an author as well, about at a birthday, everyone around the table says one thing they're thankful for the birthday person, right?
Mm.
Like, or I love to ask people on their birthday, like, what are you shedding from last year? What are you looking forward to bringing in? And it's also just like a good way to like understand where your friends at that point. Like the person who is the latest director of that Harvard study I mentioned talks about having a renewed curiosity, even with people you've known for years,
Yeah.
is a great way to deepen friendships. Like ask them something you've never asked before. And so there's all these different ways that we can think about community and friendship and building it that are honestly, they can start if you start them really small. This is just a theme with all my my work apparently. Start real small. And make that invitation
Yeah.
and just like because then what you put out will come back to you in a beautiful way, especially with friendship.
And I think on the other side too, show up and respond, you
Yeah,
know,
say what you're gonna say, you're gonna do something.
right.
And
I
then
mean,
do
the
it.
number of people who I have lost touch with because they never texted back or like never text me first and eventually it's like, well, this is a one-sided relationship, and
Yeah.
it's you can text from the bathroom. Like it's really not that hard to keep in touch. And that is, I just recently moved from LA where I had moved from DC to LA and then from LA to this very small town in Arizona. And so all of my friends live everywhere else. And so
Mm.
most of my relationships are through text and then we'll like try to schedule Zooms or whatever. And if they didn't respond to me, then or didn't, then I would have no friends, right?
Yeah.
But because they do, and like we talk all day. I have a friend, he lives in Portugal. We just send each other freaking memes all day and like pictures of
Perfect.
what we're eating and whatever, right? And we can have this like very robust relationship, regardless of the fact that we live in wildly different places and that he's lived, all over the world for years. And yet we're closer friends than ever. But it requires responding. And,
Yes.
there are so many people who I know, well, I'm going to text them and if they text me back, it'll be like 3 weeks from now, right? And like, and not just like at one busy time in their life, but that's who they are. And it's hard to keep friendships that way. And
Mhm.
Uber has this commercial that it's a great commercial, although Uber is evil. But it's all these people and they're just sending texts saying, oh, I think I'm going to stay in tonight, blah, blah, blah. And then showing people like having a birthday party alone or whatever. And the whole message is just show up, like leave the house and show up. And I
Yeah,
think
leave the house. Yeah.
really gotten to a point where we're glorifying canceling plans. And look, I'm an introvert. Nobody loved lockdown more than me. Nobody loves being at home with no pants on more than me. But the importance of actually being a person who says yes when you're invited somewhere and then actually
Hmm.
goes is
Yeah.
also it's a thing I think we've really lost and
Hmm.
need to get back because that building community takes two and
Yes, it
got to
does.
sort of be on both sides of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, look, when you're, especially in a period of building friendships, right, with
Yes.
someone new, you will know pretty quickly if they're going to reciprocate that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hate to equate it to dating, but it is like dating where you're like, okay, this person's not feeling it. Let's just move on. Or like, I know people in my life that I've known since kindergarten. Um, and this woman I'm thinking of is like a sister to me because we have such a shared history. Her dad taught me how to drive.
Oh,
Like they're like we're really close, but I don't talk to her every day. But I still consider like we kind of are like we pick up where we left off kind of friends. Um, but then I have people, yeah, I am sending memes to every day, and I also feel like very close to them. So yeah, it is a reciprocity. And then also from that, like you're saying, understanding from that data that you're getting from when you get, that text back, or that person's going to be, late to text you.
yeah.
You have data about what to expect because I'm a big people pleaser, and I can see this too in my mom. We love like hosting and, having dinner parties and bringing people in. And then I have friends who have never invited me over for dinner not one time in their life, but I'm like, oh, they have a different way of like being in a reciprocal friendship. Like what
Yeah.
they have to offer is something different. Maybe it's always showing up in a different way, right? It's not, maybe they just hate cooking, right? Like it's understanding where if you are in relationship with them, what they can give, and are you okay with receiving that? Like, I think is important. And then also too, like there are transitions in friendships, right? Like where sometimes it's like, okay, maybe we're pulling back for a little bit. That's okay. Or someone had a kid and they do need a lot of, they need different types of support, right? Something that Marissa was telling me, who wrote Platonic, was she's like, I often find it so interesting that everyone just assumes what kind of level of friendship the other person wants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're just not talking, about like maybe the friend who has the new baby is desperate for you to just call her every so often, but you're maybe pulling back. It's like, well, I don't want to bother her,
Yeah.
but I would love to see her. But like, if you just talk, maybe there is like a way to like have your friendship look a little different for a little bit of time, and then it'll change again and it'll change again. So yeah, it's transitions can be tricky, but if you are maintaining friendship by adapting and seeing who has maybe the greater needs in that moment, and it doesn't mean it's always the friend with the kid, to be honest. It's like something you have to be like, hey, like I know you need help with this, but like I just got a new promotion, I'm really psyched about it, or it's my birthday and I really want to celebrate, like I would love for you to show up, like, and when they do, that's when you're maintaining a friendship
Yeah.
successfully.
Yeah. So I want to end the interview with the end, kind of, because you talk about life planning and financial planning, and this is also something I know you know a lot about from Life Kit.
Hmm.
It's something that I think about a lot. My grandmother has been in the hospital and then recovery at a home for the last couple of
Mm-hmm.
months. She's doing great. She's doing awesome. She's
Good.
turning 94 in a couple of weeks, and she's yelling at C-SPAN, so she's fine. But I am, but she's been in the recovery wing of this nursing home. Actually, it's very nice with wonderful staff, thank God. But she has, I just recently moved here to help take care of her. And I have two aunts who live here. My mother has been here staying with me for 2 months now. She has another granddaughter who drives 3 hours down for Phoenix every weekend, right? And every hour that she's awake, there is somebody in this home with her. And
Oh, that's
like
beautiful.
half the church comes and visits her every single day. She has so many people there all of the time. We all know the doctors, we all know everybody. she is the only one in the entire wing of the nursing home who has not just that situation, but who really ever has a visitor. Like the rest of the
Wow.
people, there's one, woman who, and we know all the visitors because we're always there. She's got like two daughters who come when they can, but they work, and none of their kids or anything. And most of the people, they're alone in their room all the time. And, my grandmother has this like revolving door, and it has made me really think about what, how do I plan? Because I'm not going to have
Mm,
four daughters and granddaughters and all of these, people who feel obligated and who also, I mean, it says a lot about who my grandmother is that we love her enough to do this. But, she for weeks could not do anything for herself and really needed us to be there. I
mhm.
was thinking, like, if I'm in this situation, I have to really think about what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to have all these people to be here to do every single thing for me and advocate for me because I'm incapable of doing it for myself. And
Right.
that is something that I know single people particularly think about all the time. But, I can tell you, probably every single person in that nursing home has children and they're not there. So it's,
Yep.
you have to think about whether you have kids or not. And at the same time, single women particularly are paid less and you have more expenses when you're single. And so being able to financially plan for that future is equally difficult. So I know that you spoke to some people about these things, and also that you have done a lot of shows about these types of things on Life Kit. What are your thoughts, and what's your advice for folks who are sitting down and who, I know for a lot of single people, this is a very big source of anxiety?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing you pointed out really adeptly is that having children, having adult children of your own does not guarantee that they will be the type of social support and safety net in your later years,
Yep.
right? That's just a reality. There's a lot of people step up, and that's really beautiful to hear that your family's really come together around your grandmother. But it's not a guarantee, like you said. And I think what single people are, forced to think about is like, it's really not a guarantee, right? So you do have to plan. And so I think that's a gift though, that you get to at least think about that, because I think the not going into a marriage or any kind of partnership without intention, I think sets you up for a lot of heartbreak in a lot of ways. And one of them could be, well, I'm going to have kids and then we're going to have a big family and then they'll take care of me. It's like, well, you might have infertility issues, right? You might have a child who's incapable of caring for you. You might have to still care for them. There's a lot of ifs, right? Like, so single people automatically out of the gate are thinking, okay, that nothing is guaranteed. I'm already way ahead of that. And so, yeah, planning, in a variety of ways, right? So, making sure that you're thinking about investing early as you can, right, for retirement. From Life Kit, we have a great episode about doing that. And the beauty is that you don't have to like play the stock market game. It's a lot of set it and forget it, what I love. I'm always telling people about our investing episodes because, like, if you're opening up a simple Roth IRA, right? If you're
Yes.
making under less than a certain amount of money, you are getting that money, you're growing that money tax free, which is a great thing. Setting automated savings, that's huge. Like I did that years ago. I was lucky that my grandfather was an estate lawyer, and he basically taught me from a young age. He's like shaking me metaphorically by the shoulders, going, save 10% of your paycheck every time. And so for my first job, I was saving that emergency fund, right? Building those like larger savings and investments. But then also thinking about there's a lot of talk about communal living too as we get older for
Yeah.
single people, right? And a lot of like, especially no surprise here, a lot of older women getting together to live together and having the joys of communal living, Golden Girls style, where you can look out for each other. Maybe you can't do every single thing, but you can at least have more resources to pull together and figure out, okay, well, this person needs more help. Just making sure that someone's around, right? Like, that's been really beautiful to see. And I think more people are interested in communal living as well. That is an option, right? Moving closer to people who are your found family, even if you don't want to share a house, right? Like developing those communities and friendships with people that when you show up and be a good friend, they will take care of you and show up for you as well, right? Even if there isn't that legal bond, that blood bond between you. And so I think yes, it does take a little planning required, but I think that's actually a gift because it's not going to surprise you as much, right? If you get to that, if you're lucky enough to age, and get to that stage where you have hopefully a peaceful, end of your life, and need a lot of support, that you have things set up, right? So the things like investing, saving smartly, making those savings automatic, and then just investing in your community. It sounds like, let's say if your grandmother hadn't had kids and grandchildren, it sounds like she was pretty invested in a community of a church, and those people showed up, right? So she's like reinforced, like double reinforced. It's amazing.
It's the Dorothy Tompkins way.
There we go. We love Dorothy.
No, well, this has all been so great. I know I'm like raving, but I love this book.
Oh, that's so sweet of you, Sam.
It's really, I think that it's been interesting doing this podcast and talking to so many people. And am lucky that I have so many single friends. And there was really literally something in this for everybody. Even for me, and I was like, I've got my single life sorted out. Everything's great. And then I was like, really
that's great.
So
amazing.
Great. Congrats, really, really. And also keep making Life Kit, please. It's so good.
Yes. No plans of stopping. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
And for everyone listening, in the show notes, there will be a link to Life Kit and to an investing episode, as well as obviously the book, because it is a really great podcast. So just thank you, Meghan. Congrats. This is wonderful.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and of course, leave a review. Until next week, here's hoping you find joy in your solo life.